my favorite video games of all time just so happen to be Atlus RPGs, so you'd think that their brand new banger metaphor would have some kind of a restraining order on me by this point. But to be completely honest with you, I've been actively choosing to avoid it altogether for the time being, and if you give me like 75 years to tell you the reasons why, I'd be happy to do so and have pretty much the whole duration left over. Roll it! Okay, so like I said, I really love Atlus. They've really been on a roll since the last decade or so and really seem to master the JRPG in their own unique way. Obviously, there's tons of other great companies out there as well, but much like Tarantino movies or Hideo Kojima games, there's just this unique feel to Atlus titles that nobody else can replicate. Whether or not you like that comes down to personal preference, but personally, I think the Atlus feel is great. In fact, I really wish I discovered Atlus a lot earlier than I did, but I'm just glad I got on the bandwagon at all. However, Metaphor not only looks amazing based on what I've seen, but apparently it's like the best thing ever if you're to believe the people have actually played it. Again, I wouldn't know myself, nor will I for about at least 6 months or so, and the main reason for that basically boils down to the fact that while Atlus did develop the game, it's ultimately owned by Sega. In case you didn't know, Sega always, without fail, discounts their games down to like 20 bucks within about a year or so at most, and sometimes even 6 to 9 months later. Hell, at the time of this recording, the game's barely been out for a month and it's already been 30% off. Sucks to support a brand new game at launch sometimes, doesn't it? But I mean, look, for a game made by one of my favorite developers that I'm very likely to find to be one of my all-time favorites, it's not really that big of a deal to pay a little bit more to get my hands on it a little sooner. After all, I'm honestly not broke or cheap or anything like that, but the thing is, my backlog's been kind of frigged for a few years, so like, why exactly should I be in a rush to play Metaphor right now? Be among the first to play it? Yeah, I'm sorry, but the idea of being like the 458,000th person to play a game just really isn't that great of an incentive for me. So rather than spending $70 or even $50 right now, why not instead choose to work on some of my other games that I got in my backlog, and then, after that, maybe it'll be time for a brand new Atlus RPG at a fraction of the cost. I mean, not only do I have other games in my backlog, but I actually have other Atlus RPGs. Hell, I've never even played Shin Megami Tensei 4, so if I don't play it now, then when will I? And like I said, these games are all amazing, but they take like 70 to 100 hours, so why do I have to pay 50 to 70 bucks just to rush to play Metaphor right this second? I mean, sure, it'd be nice to do absolutely nothing but work on my backlog all day every day, but it's not like I only enjoy video games and nothing else, you know? Never mind money, I don't even know where anybody finds the time to play all these new games that keep coming out. I like way too much stuff. Kinda sucks. Trying to figure out what you're supposed to do next with your spare time is one of the hardest first world problems you could have. Like, am I supposed to play 3 or 4 50 to 20 hour games, or do I just play one JRPG? And if I do choose a JRPG, then why does it have to be the most recent one that hasn't even gotten the inevitable Sega price cut yet? Well, like I said, if I was caught up on everything, then I'd just say frig it and pay a little bit more for something I know I'm gonna love. After all, I don't really mind supporting developers I like, even if they're already doing really well. But even beyond the fact that it's an absolute certainty that Metaphor is gonna get a severe price cut so fast that it's not even worth putting too much editing into this video that's gonna be rendered outdated before long. But for whatever reason, nobody ever told anybody at Atlus that DLC is a thing these days, so there's a very strong possibility that this version of Metaphor that exists right now is just gonna be rendered obsolete with a new updated version that everybody's gonna unanimously agree is the true finished version. Re-releasing updated versions of games a few years after the initial release made sense on the PS2, or hell, even the Vita. In fact, it was actually pretty cool, but it's pretty friggin' outrageous that Atlus is still doing this these days. Honestly, it's straight up trashy if you ask me, because when they made Shin Megami Tensei 5 and Persona 5 respectively, you know that they already knew they were going to release Royal and Vengeance a few years down the line, and purposely chose not to tell anybody, because it would have undoubtedly hindered the initial sales. You may say, why would any business do anything to hinder their own sales? And normally, I'd understand that business is business, but like, this is just bad business for everybody involved. Not only is it a dick move to essentially release an unfinished beta version, but I'd wager that most people won't rebuy the same game again. Although to be fair, it is hard to know this for sure, because while Persona 5 Royal did in fact outsell vanilla Persona 5, it was also available on pretty much every platform imaginable. Initially though, Persona 5 Royal did not outsell the original version, because why the frig would it? Most people had already played the original game at that point, and what sucks about this is that the version of Persona 5 a lot of people played was the unfinished one. Like, yeah, it's still a fantastic game, so it's really not that big of a deal, but it just sucks that a lot of early adopters missed out on the true version, because I mean, come on, let's be honest, Royal definitely is better. Not only that, but because Atlus doesn't want the early adopters to feel left out, sequels like Strikers and Tactica are pretty much forbidden from referencing characters and events that were added to Royal. Even though it was completely okay for Persona Qs 1 and 2 to have Marie and the female protagonist from 4 Gold and 3 Portable. So like, if you played both versions of Persona 5, was it a waste of time to play the original or Royal? Take your pick, I guess. Man, all I know is when I played Persona 5, I didn't think there was gonna be a Royal down the line. Like, sure, I had just played Persona 4 Golden at the time, so I should have known better, but I just figured if Atlus was gonna add more content, it had been via DLC since, you know, this was kind of a thing in gaming that was well established at this point. But nope, a few years went by and Atlus said, just kidding, here's the real version. And you know that they clearly had this plan from the beginning when Persona 5 was greenlit in the first place. I realized this was gonna happen when I reached January in Persona 5, and it just kinda skipped all the way to March, unlike Persona 4 Golden where you had stuff to do during this time. It was at that point I knew I'd been gypped, and that sucks. And like, sure, I didn't have to buy the game again, but the problem's that if you did buy the game early, you were burned. Either you experienced the vanilla version, or, like me, you spent full retail again for the true version, only for like 95% of the game to have already just been spoiled for you. And honestly, that's my biggest issue with all this. I didn't even mind paying again, because after all, I pay full retail for 15-hour games with a smile on my face. So honestly, what's double retail price for 100 hours of one of my absolute all-time favorite games? Like, don't get me wrong, it's lame to have been tricked into spending money twice, but it's not that much money for the enjoyment I got out of it. But not only was the initial 80 to 100-ish hours I just spent on the vanilla version essentially wasted, but it also kind of ruined Royal for me. I mean, most of Royal's just doing the exact same stuff you already did in the vanilla version of the game, and then after a few dozen hours, you're just like, oh wait, this is new? What's this all about? And then it's right on back to the normal version of the game you already played for a few dozen hours before you get something new again. To be fair, there were gameplay updates, and Mementos was way more fun the second time around, but I still just wish the only version of Persona 5 I played was Royal, because it just would have been a better experience overall. I mean, I'm not a big enough snob to feel pride in the fact that I experienced both versions of this game. If anything, I wish I had just spent the initial 100 hours in the vanilla version on other games. You know, like Shin Megami Tensei 4 that I'm only just now getting to play for the first time. And yes, I know there's Apocalypse to Shin Megami Tensei 4, but that's an entirely different game altogether. Sure, it's the same game engine and it takes place at the same time as the original story, but you're still playing as a completely different character in a brand new story. And if you ask me, this is an ethical way Atlus should be milking their franchises. Not just the bare minimum amount of extra content to get you to want to replay a game you've already played before. And given the fact that I already knew about Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse, I felt pretty confident in buying Shin Megami Tensei 5 right off the bat. And wouldn't you know it, that was also one of my all-time favorite games. Frankly, I can't get enough Atlus, and I hate myself for that, because had I waited 2 years and just played some other games in the meantime, you know, like Shin Megami Tensei 4 that I'm only just now getting to for the first time, I could have experienced the very best version of Shin Megami Tensei 5 with the re-release of Vengeance, which Atlus never told us about, despite the fact that, like Persona 5 Royal, they certainly knew they would do when Shin Megami Tensei 5 was first greenlit. It's not a matter of the originals being unexpected low-budget hits that Atlus is capitalizing on, which would be a little more understandable. Now, they knew both these games would be hits, and they decided to release unfinished beta versions for both of them, with true versions coming out a few years later, with the expectation being that the dedicated hardcore fanbase was gonna buy them both again. This doesn't bother me nearly as much as Royal did, since Vengeance at least went multiplat right off the bat, and while another ending is cool, it still kind of feels optional and a lot less like you're missing out. But even so, I still regret playing the base version of Shin Megami Tensei 5 and wish I'd just held out for the definitive edition since it was only like a 2-year wait. The fact that there's no guarantee that Metaphor is going to receive the same treatment given that it's a new IP does make it tempting to just bite the bullet and take another Atlus risk, and hey, if I didn't have other games to play, I probably would since I'm sure the game is incredible. But given the fact that I do have so many other options for the foreseeable future, there's just nothing pushing me towards taking a risk right now. If it takes me a year to catch up on my backlog, Metaphor is going to be $20. If it takes me 2 years, then there's a good chance that Metaphor Vengeance Royal Golden or whatever will be out. And if it takes me 3 years, then Metaphor Vengeance Royal Golden or whatever is probably gonna be like $20. Either way, playing Metaphor right now just isn't in my best interest. Like, sure, if everybody had this mindset that it hurt the developer that I love so much, but maybe they should, you know, stop punishing early adopters. And look, I get that diehard Atlus fans are already gonna hate me for making all these completely reasonable points, because this is a practice they've just been so used to for so long that I think the idea of anybody having any sort of a problem with it whatsoever is just pure insanity or them being a baby. However, seeing so many longtime Atlus fans being frogs in boiling water in regards to this situation, though, kinda makes me somewhat glad that I am late to the Atlus bandwagon, because it helps me see how dumb Atlus's re-releasing gimmick can be. I mean, porting a game years later in another console generation with updates is one thing, but if it's gonna be 2 years on the same platform, then either give us something entirely new like Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse, or just do separate DLC like the answer with Persona 3 Reload. Until then, though, I'm gonna keep being wary about Atlus games on day one, especially with so many other games to choose from in my backlog, whether they be modern or retro. Anyway, that's all for today, but if you got a kick out of me questioning Atlus, then you should watch the video where I question Atlus big time with their use of Persona 3's main character dating the 10-year-old Ken, but if you'll excuse me though, I gotta go water my snake. Later!